But we begin tonight with the clearest sign yet that health reform will pass, and soon. The White House announcing today that President Obama is delaying an international trip in order to stay in D.C. to focus on health reform for just a few days longer. It's a relatively sure sign that something's about to happen. Another sign? House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's response to the news about the president's travel plans.
I'm delighted that the president will be here for the passage of the bill. It's going to be historic, and it would not be possible without his tremendous, tremendous leadership.
The speaker telling reporters today that the president sticking around for a week or so means he will be here when the House passes the final version of health reform. In other words, this is it. Welcome to the last few days in which health reform is a few beat-up old bills instead of being a brand spanking new law. Now that the Democrats have a feasible strategy for passing health reform, with no Republican votes expected, even in the Senate, surely they will include that public option that the House passed back at Christmas time, right? A public option, that'll be in the bill, won't it?
It isn't with a little sadness that I view that it is not in the bill.
Sadness aside, I had thought that the public option was back. What we've heard today, I think, is that it's dead again?
I'm quite sad that a public option isn't in there, but it isn't a case of it's not in there because the Senate is whipping against it. It isn't in there because they don't have the votes to have it in there, or they would have had it in there to begin with.
Don't get it. Since the Senate didn't have the public option in the bill that the Senate passed back at Christmas time, the public option can't be put in there now? There's an 800-pound gorilla in the room here that nobody's talking about. The public option is really popular. Out of so many things in health reform that are hard to remember, hard to explain, hard to understand the benefit of, the public option makes sense, right? You could choose a government-run nonprofit insurance plan if you didn't like what private insurance companies were offering. It makes sense. It makes sense as economics. People like the idea, but for some reason, even though he's a great big gorilla and he's standing right out there in the open, the Democrats are ignoring him right now. If you're willing to pay attention to the 800-pound gorilla in the room, the popularity of the public option, what that gorilla means is that Democrats don't need to be giving up the public option. The public option doesn't have to be left out of the final House bill just because it was left out of the original Senate bill. What's the evidence? Gorilla? Well, for starters, there's Dick Durbin, Majority Whip in the Senate. His office made an announcement today ahead of Speaker Pelosi's press conference saying that if the House included a public option in their final bill, he and the rest of the Senate leadership will be aggressively whipping for the public option. Further evidence? Gorilla? Let's see. Gorilla, are you still there? The 40? Oh, yeah. Further evidence, Gorilla? You're right there. Yeah. See, the gorilla has very unwieldy hands. But they're working now. There are 41 senators who are now on the record supporting the idea of passing a public option when those changes to the Senate bill are passed using reconciliation. In other words, 41 out of the 50 votes you need to pass the public option are pre-whipped. 41 out of 50. At least 41 of the votes needed to pass a public option in the Senate are already in the bag. Contrary to what Speaker Pelosi said today, there is a good chance the votes are there to pass the public option in the Senate. She cannot blame this in the Senate. So, is it possible that there isn't support for a public option, not in the Senate, but in the House? Well, the 800-pound gorilla that is the enduring popularity of the public option points out that the original House version of health reform had a public option in it. What the 800-pound gorilla in the room means is that the public option enjoys broad support from the American public. Well done. The same American public that elected giant Democratic majorities in both houses of Congress based on promises that they'd do things like pass comprehensive health reform. So now, after a year of fighting for it, when it appears they finally figured out how to get health reform passed, would the Democrats just give up on the public option? Why, when they finally figured out how to accomplish the single biggest, most ambitious item on their policy agenda, would they throw away the part of it that people really like? and that looks like it would work really well. Joining us now is Chris Hayes, Washington editor of The Nation. Chris, thanks very much for coming on the show. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too, Rachel.
Nancy Pelosi taking a lot of heat about this from the left. She's the one not putting the public option in the final House bill, so she's taking most of the blame for killing it. Is there a legitimate fear that if she did include it, there wouldn't be enough votes in the Senate?
Yeah, if you talk to people on the Hill side, in Hill Democratic staffers, they will tell you the 41 votes, they're skeptical. They think a lot of those, or a fair number of those senators, put their name on it thinking, hey, this is a free pass, I'll score some points with the base of the party, and it's never going to come up anyway. And they also think that when Dick Durbin, a day before he said I'll whip for it, said I'll whip against it, that was a moment of unintentional honesty, when that's actually the agenda there. And they feel like on the Hill side that it's a very high-stakes game to move ahead with the public option if they're not sure they have it on the Senate side.
What I understood about the Durbin thing was that his office was saying, and he was saying, whatever the House sends over for the reconciliation package, the reconciliation stuff has to start in the House, and then it comes over to the Senate side. And he was saying, no matter what's in that, there's not going to be any amendments. There's not going to be any changes. So if the public option is in it, I'll whip for it. If somebody wants to add the public option over here as an amendment, I'll whip against that. Nobody can add any amendments to this thing, which really puts it on Nancy Pelosi in terms of what goes into the final package. It puts it to the House in terms of what's actually going to originate from that House there.
Yeah, except for the fact that what is going to come out of the House is being negotiated between three parties. It's being negotiated between the House leadership, the Senate leadership, and the White House. The people on the House Democratic aid side, and I'm channeling their side of the story, and I don't know if it's the full story, they will tell you, look, the House, the Senate doesn't want this, and the President doesn't want it. We're the only ones that actually passed this darn thing. So it's a very, very frustrating situation where it's become this kind of like murder mystery game of Clue. It's this whodunit. You know, who killed the public option? Was it Senator Reid with procedural obfuscation in the Senate chamber? Was it Rahm Emanuel with, you know, the insurance industry in the Roosevelt room? You know, everyone is pointing fingers at everyone else. It really is hard to figure out who actually put the knife in.
Well, if there is an overt plan to kill it, and it's not just a big misunderstanding, Three's Company style, there is a problem with the way they've rolled it out. Because what Nancy Pelosi is explaining is there aren't the votes in the Senate. We know there are at least in terms of what people say they'll vote for, there are 41 votes, and it looks like it's conceivable there could be 50. We've got Dick Durbin saying if it was in there, I'd happily whip for it. It's not inconceivable that they couldn't get it. Their explanation doesn't make any sense. And so you're looking, I mean, possibly to the administration to say that, hey, it doesn't make sense the way they're talking about it. Maybe they're being told not to include it.
Look, I think the administration has sent every conceivable sign, aside from saying, oh, sure, we're for it, that they're not actually for it. I mean, if you want to look at whose feet do you rest this on, it is the White House. At every opportunity when they could have intervened on behalf of the public option, they have very, very ostentatiously chosen not to. Now, I think at this point you're right. The ball is in Pelosi's court, and I think the Speaker should just call everyone's bluff. And she should try to get it. When they put it in the markup on 3 o'clock on Monday, she should put the public option in and actually make Dick Durbin do what he said and make the White House do what they said. Because at this point, everyone's for it, except no one lifts a finger to make it happen.
In terms of the actual timing of this, is that what we're pointing toward? 3 p.m. on 3 p.m. Eastern on Monday. That's the final markup of the bill. That's the reconciliation package language that will come from the House. And after that, nothing's going to change?
That's my sense. I mean, the way that they're going to manage it on the floor in the House is they're not going to allow amendments, right? Because that would open up this whole can of worms. So whatever is going to come out of that markup on Monday at 3. Remember, the House is a body whose legislative procedures are much more carefully managed by the leadership. Whatever comes out of that markup, that's what we're going to be seeing in the final patch. If it's not in there at 3 o'clock on Monday, if it doesn't come out of that final markup, then I think the ship finally has sailed. The nails in the coffin. Choose your metaphor for the end of this maddening bit of political malfeasance on the part of the Democratic Party.
Well, let me pry the nail out of the coffin for a second.
Good.
Let's say as of 3 p.m. on Monday, it's not in there. I mean, I have a feeling it's going to be a busy weekend as people try to encourage Speaker Pelosi that the votes really could be there in the Senate and that people really could get this thing passed if she'd only try. But if it doesn't, could the public option realistically be brought back up separately? I mean, Alan Grayson has this 4-page standalone public option act. Could it happen that way?
I mean, yes. The short answer is yes. Now, there's an argument that says, look, we're at the high watermark of Democratic power in terms of the numbers. We're never going to have a shot as good at this. At the same time, the theory behind, progressive marginal legislative victories is that they enable the next fight, that you set up the next fight, and as soon as you win one thing, you set up the next one. Grayson's already got a bill in there, and because, as you've noted, as all of us have noted time and time again ad nauseum, it is very popular. There should be the next push, the day after it gets signed, should be for that. And you know what? They're going to have to have their feet held to the fire because they've really screwed over the base on this one. But you got to, it's rolling a rock up a hill. There's no reason it can't happen in a future bill.
Chris Hayes, Washington editor of The Nation. Chris, appreciate you joining us on a Friday night, and also the loan of the gorilla suit. Yeah. Unlike last time, we promised to have it cleaned this time. I swear.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Chris.
Have a good weekend.
All right. Let's play Who Said This? And the quote is this.